These towns were never supposed to be empty, so why does it feel like they're still being watched? Across Tennessee, entire communities vanished, homes left intact, streets untouched, stories unfinished. Some were flooded, some abandoned overnight, and some no one can fully explain. Tonight, you're about to see places where time didn't just stop, it refused to move on. And by the end, one of these towns may make you question what really gets left behind. Elkmont, Great Smoky Mountains. Elkmont doesn't feel abandoned. It feels paused, like someone pressed stop in the middle of a life that never resumed. Once a thriving resort in the Great Smoky Mountains, it was filled with wealthy vacationers, laughter echoing through wooden cabins, and nights lit by lantern glow. Today, those same cabins stand hollow, their windows dark, and their doors barely holding on. But here's what unsettles people. Nothing looks violently destroyed. There's no sign of chaos, just quiet decay creeping slowly, as if the forest itself is reclaiming something it never gave up. Walk deeper, and you'll notice how the silence changes. It becomes heavier, almost deliberate. Visitors often report the same strange detail, the feeling of being observed, not threatened, just watched. Some claim to see faint flickers of light inside cabins that have no electricity. Others hear footsteps on porches that collapse under their own weight. And maybe that's what makes Elkmont so disturbing. It doesn't scream for attention. It waits, as if something here never truly left, and doesn't want to be forgotten. Proctor. Proctor didn't fade away. It was erased, deliberately, completely, and almost too quietly. And when Fontana Dam was built during World War II, this small mountain town was sacrificed for progress. Homes were abandoned, families relocated, and the entire community disappeared beneath rising water. But here's the part no one talks about enough. Proctor didn't vanish cleanly. It still lingers beneath the surface. When the lake recedes during dry seasons, pieces of the town come back. Cracked foundations, broken paths, and most chilling of all, the cemetery. Graves rise from the mud like something unfinished, names barely readable, as if time itself hesitated to erase them. Locals say the air feels wrong when the ruins are exposed, heavier, colder, as if something buried too quickly is trying to remind people it's still there. You're not just looking at a ghost town, you're looking at a place that was drowned, not abandoned. And sometimes when something is forced under instead of laid to rest, it doesn't stay silent forever. Fork Mountain. Fork Mountain feels like a place that emptied out too fast, like people left before they were ready. Once a coal mining town deep in Tennessee's rugged terrain, it depended entirely on the rhythm of industry. When the mines slowed, life followed, and then, almost suddenly, everything stopped. What remains today are scattered ruins, crumbling homes, rusted fragments of machinery, and a cemetery slowly being swallowed by overgrowth. But the strange part isn't what you see, it's what you hear. People who visited after sunset describe faint metallic echoes, like distant tools striking rock. Others claim they hear movement where there should be none, shifting gravel, a door creaking, something pacing just out of sight. So there's no clear explanation for the town's rapid disappearance, no single event, no disaster, just a slow collapse that feels, somehow, incomplete. Fork Mountain doesn't feel empty. It feels like it's waiting for something, or someone, to return and finish what was started. And that lingering sense of unfinished business is what makes it so hard to ignore. Cades Cove settlements. Cades Cove is not a ghost town in the traditional sense. It's preserved, maintained, visited, and somehow that makes it even more unsettling. Old cabins still stand, churches remain intact, graves are carefully marked. On the surface, it looks like a peaceful historical site, a window into the past. But spend enough time there, especially when the fog rolls in and something shifts. The silence here feels different, too complete, too aware. And visitors often describe an overwhelming sense of presence, particularly near the cemeteries. It's not fear exactly. It's the feeling that you've stepped into something that hasn't quite let go of its past. Stories circulate quietly. Figures seen between trees, Doors found open that were closed just moments before, shadows that don't match anything around them. What makes Cades Cove disturbing isn't abandonment, it's preservation. These homes weren't destroyed or forgotten, they were left exactly as they were. And sometimes when a place is preserved too perfectly, it doesn't feel like history. It feels like something still living inside it. Rugby. Rugby was supposed to be perfect. A utopian British colony built in the heart of Tennessee, a place of equality, culture, and intellectual life. It had structure, vision, purpose. And yet, it failed. Today, Rugby still stands, almost eerily intact. Victorian homes line quiet paths, their design elegant, their presence almost too deliberate. But there's something off about it. The stillness isn't peaceful, it's unnatural. Visitors often mention the same thing. It feels staged, like a place designed to look alive, but missing the energy that makes it real. Conversations seem to fade too quickly. Footsteps echo longer than they should. Even the air feels strangely suspended. No single reason explains why Rugby collapsed. Some blame disease, others isolation, but none of it fully accounts for how quickly its dream dissolved. And that's what lingers here. Not just the buildings, but the idea of something that should have worked and didn't. Because sometimes, just the most unsettling places aren't the ones that failed violently. They're the ones that failed quietly, without ever revealing why. Falls Mill, Belvedere. Falls Mill doesn't look like a ghost town at first glance. The structure still stands. The water still flows. The wheel still turns. But the absence of life is what makes it feel wrong. Once a working mill surrounded by a small but active community, this place thrived on constant motion. Grain being processed, people coming and going, voices layered over the sound of rushing water. Now, that same water is the only thing left moving. And somehow, it feels louder than it should. Visitors often describe an odd sensory disconnect here. The environment feels active, but the human presence is completely gone. You hear motion, but see stillness. And that imbalance creates a quiet unease that builds the longer you stay. Some claim the mill doesn't feel abandoned, it feels paused mid-operation, as if everything stopped at once, without warning, without closure. There are no widely accepted ghost stories here, no dramatic legends, just a persistent feeling that something is slightly out of place, and sometimes that's far more unsettling than any story. Because when a place feels wrong, but you can't explain why, your mind starts filling in the gaps. Big Ridge Settlement, Big Ridge State Park. Big Ridge hides its past well. At first, it feels like any quiet forest, calm, natural, untouched. But beneath that stillness lies something older. Entire settlements once existed here, now erased from maps, but not from memory. When the land was flooded to create the lake, parts of that community didn't disappear. They slipped beneath the surface, and somehow that presence still lingers. Locals don't tell dramatic stories. Instead, they repeat small, consistent details, sounds near the shoreline at night, movement in the trees when there's no wind, reflections on the water that don't match anything around them. Visitors often describe a sudden shift, like stepping into a space that doesn't belong to them. One moment feels normal, the next, something changes. Big Ridge doesn't try to scare you, it simply lets you enter, and then quietly reminds you that you were never alone there. Granville. Granville isn't fully abandoned, but it doesn't feel fully alive either. It exists somewhere in between, caught in a slower rhythm that doesn't match the modern world. Once a busy river town, Granville depended on movement, boats, trade, constant interaction. But when those routes faded, the town didn't collapse, it just slowed down, and never recovered. Today, everything looks intact. Buildings stand, streets are clear, but something feels off. Visitors often say it feels like stepping into a photograph, perfectly preserved but missing life. Sounds feel distant, time feels stretched, conversations seem shorter, quieter, like they don't fully settle. There's no tragedy tied to Granville, no single moment that explains its shift. And maybe that's what makes it so strange. Because it didn't disappear, it simply stopped evolving. and stayed behind while everything else kept moving forward. Sitico. Sitico carries a silence that feels older than memory, long before it was considered abandoned, and it was a Cherokee settlement, layered with generations of life, meaning, and presence. Today, almost nothing remains visibly. No buildings, no clear ruins, just subtle traces, mounds, altered land, quiet hints that something once existed here. But instead of feeling empty, the place feels heavier. Visitors rarely describe fear. What they feel is something deeper, a quiet weight, a sense that they've stepped into something that shouldn't be disturbed. The silence here is different. It doesn't invite noise. It feels like it's asking for respect. There are no dramatic stories explaining it, no single event, just history that was never fully erased. And that's what makes Sitico stand out. It doesn't feel abandoned. It feels like it still belongs to something, even if no one can clearly explain what that is. Dry Hill. Dry Hill feels unfinished, like a story that stopped halfway through. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't erased. It was simply left behind, mid-thought. Scattered homes still stand, partially reclaimed by nature. Roads fade into overgrowth. Property lines exist, but serve no purpose anymore. And yet, there's no sign of sudden disaster. No fire, no damage, just absence. That absence raises a quiet but persistent question. Why did people leave like this? There's little documentation explaining its decline. No defining event, just a gradual disappearance that feels too quiet for how complete it became. Visitors often describe a sense of interruption, doors slightly open, objects left in place, layout suggesting life should have continued, but didn't. Dry Hill doesn't tell its story directly, and it exists as a gap, something that should have moved forward, but never did. And sometimes what's missing feels far more unsettling than what remains. Prudin. Prudin sits on the edge of two states, but it feels like it belongs to neither anymore. Once a coal mining town straddling the Tennessee-Kentucky border, it depended entirely on industry to survive. When the mine slowed, the town didn't collapse overnight. It drained, slowly, quietly, until almost nothing remained. What's left today is fragmented. Foundations, scattered structures, and a cemetery that seems far more intact than anything else. And that's where the unease begins. Visitors often say the cemetery feels active, not in a dramatic sense, but in a way that's hard to ignore. The air feels heavier there. Sounds carry differently, even standing still. So there's a sense that something is slightly out of alignment. There are no major ghost stories tied to Prudin, no widely known tragedies, but there's a lingering question that never fully settles. Why does the cemetery feel more present than the town itself? Because Prudin doesn't feel like it disappeared. It feels like it shifted, leaving behind only the parts that refused to go. Roan Mountain communities. High above the rest of Tennessee, the scattered communities of Roan Mountain feel distant, not just physically, but emotionally. These weren't towns in the traditional sense. They were isolated settlements carved into the mountain, built by people who chose distance over connection. And eventually, even they left. What remains are traces, collapsed cabins, faint pathways, subtle signs of where life once existed. But unlike other ghost towns, Roan Mountain doesn't feel abandoned. It feels rejected. The environment here is harsh. Weather shifts quickly. Fog rolls in without warning. Visibility drops. And when that happens, the landscape changes entirely. Familiar ground becomes disorienting. Distance becomes unclear. Visitors often report a strong sense of isolation, even when they're not alone. A feeling of being cut off, not just from people, but from direction itself. There's no mystery about why people left. Survival here was difficult, but that doesn't explain the atmosphere that lingers, because Roan Mountain doesn't just feel empty. It feels like a place that doesn't want anything to stay for too long. Hales Bar, Guild Area. Hales Bar carries one of the strongest reputations in Tennessee, but what makes it unsettling isn't just the stories, it's the location itself. Built around one of the first major hydroelectric dams in the region, this area was once filled with activity, engineering, and constant human presence. But the project struggled. Flooding issues, structural problems, and ongoing complications made it difficult to maintain. Eventually, it was abandoned. What remains is a mixture of ruins, water, and underground spaces that feel far more complex than they appear. And that complexity creates an atmosphere that's hard to define. Visitors often describe a strong sensory imbalance here. Temperature changes, sudden silence, or the feeling of entering a space that doesn't behave normally. Not fear, but disorientation. And there are countless stories connected to Hales Bar, but even without them, the environment itself feels off. The layout is unnatural. The spaces echo differently. The air feels dense in certain areas. It's not just what happened here, it's how the place feels now, like something was built, disrupted, and never fully settled again. Reliance. Reliance is not completely abandoned, and that's exactly what makes it so difficult to define. A few people still pass through. Some structures remain in use, but the town itself feels suspended between states of existence. Once a small but functional community along the Hiwassee River, Reliance slowly lost its momentum. Industry faded, population declined, and instead of disappearing, it lingered. Walking through Reliance, there's a strange contrast. Some buildings feel maintained. Others feel forgotten. The environment shifts from active to empty within a few steps, and that inconsistency creates a quiet tension. Visitors often mention a feeling of disconnection, as if the town doesn't fully register as either alive or abandoned. Conversations feel distant. Movement feels slower. Even sound behaves differently, fading too quickly or carrying too far. There's no single explanation for Reliance's condition. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't erased. It just stopped becoming something more. And now it exists in between. Never fully gone, but never fully here either. Loyston. Loyston didn't decay. It didn't empty. It was deliberately submerged. When Norris Dam was constructed, this entire town was sacrificed, its homes, roads, and structures swallowed by rising water. But unlike other flooded towns, Loyston doesn't feel completely gone. During periods of low water, parts of the town return, not fully, but enough to recognize. Foundations reappear, road lines become visible, and most disturbingly, the cemetery rises above the surface on a small island, separated from everything else. That separation changes how the place feels. The town is gone, but the graves remain, isolated, exposed, and still intact. Visitors often describe an unusual stillness here. The water moves, but the environment feels fixed. Time feels uneven, like parts of the past are still present, while others have completely disappeared. There are no confirmed explanations for the atmosphere people report, just a consistent feeling that something interrupted the natural order of things. Because Loyston wasn't left behind, it was forced under, and sometimes, so what's forced under doesn't feel like it's meant to stay there forever. Some towns fade, others are buried, and some feel like they're still holding on. You've just seen places where time didn't end. It fractured. The question is, what really lingers after people leave? Which one unsettled you the most? Because once you start noticing these patterns, you begin to realize some places aren't forgotten. They're waiting.